My Uncle Silas was fond of fishing. It was an occupation that helped to keep him from thinking too much about work, and also how terribly hard it was. If you went through the bottom of my Uncle Silas's garden, past the gooseberry bushes, the rhubarb and the pigsties, you came to a path that went alongside a wood, where primroses grew so richly in spring that they blotted out the floor of oak and hazel leaves. In summer, wild strawberries followed the primroses, and by July the meadows beyond the wood were frothy with meadowsweet, red clover, and the seed of tall soft grasses. At the end of a second meadow, a little river, narrow in parts and bellying out into black deep pools in others, ran along between willows and alders, occasional clumps of dark high reeds, and a few wild crab trees. Some of the pools in July would be white with water lilies, and snakes would swim across the light flat leaves in the sun. Moorhens talked to each other behind the reeds, and water rats would plop suddenly out of sight under clumps of yellow monkey flower. Here in this little river, my Uncle Silas used to tell me when I was a boy, "Their damn pike used to be as big as hippopottomassiz. Course they ain't so big now," he would say, "nor yet the tench, nor yet the perch, nor yet the—" "Why aren't they so big?" "Well, I'm talking about 50 years ago, 60 years ago, very nearly 70 years ago." "If they weren't so big then," I said, "all that time ago, they ought to be even bigger now." "Not the ones we catched," he said. "They ain't there." You couldn't, as you see from this, fox my Uncle Silas very easily, but I was at times a very inquisitive, persistent little boy. "How big were the tench?" I said. "Well, I should always recollect one as me and Sammy Twizzle caught," he said. "I had to lay it in a peg trough to carry it home." "And how big were the perch?" "Well," he said, rolling his eye in recollection, in that way he had of bringing the wrinkled lid slowly down over it, like a fish ancient in craftiness himself, "I don't know as I can justly recollect the size of that one. Me and Arthur Sugars nipped out of a September morning one time. But I do know I cleaned up the back fin and used it for horse comb for about 20 year. "Oh, Uncle Silas," I would say, "let's go fishing. Let's go and see if they're still as big as hippopottomassiz." But it was not always easy. Once my Uncle Silas had settled under the trees at the end of the garden on a hot July afternoon to persuade him that it was worth walking across 2 meadows just to see if the fish were as big as they used to be. Nevertheless, I was, as I say, a very inquisitive, persistent little boy, and finally my Uncle Silas would roll over, take the red handkerchief off his face, and grunt, "If you ain't the biggest whirtle breeches I ever knowed, I'll go on over. Go and get the rod and bring a bit of dough. There'll be no peace until you do, will there?" "Shall I bring the rod for you too?" "Rod?" he said. "For me, rod?" He let fall over his eye a tremendous bleary fish-like lid of scorn. "When me and Sammy Twizzle went a-fishing, all we had to catch 'em with were our bare hands, and a drop of neck oil." "What's neck oil?" "Never you mind," he said. "You get the rod and I'll get the neck oil." And presently we were walking out of the garden, past the wood, and across the meadows, I carrying the rod, the dough, and perhaps a piece of caraway cake in a paper bag, my Uncle Silas waddling along in his stony-coloured corduroy trousers, carrying the neck oil. Sometimes I would be very inquisitive about the neck oil, which was often pale greenish yellow, rather the colour of cowslip, or perhaps of parsnips, and sometimes purplish red, rather the colour of elderberries, or perhaps of blackberries or plums. On one occasion, I noticed that the neck oil was very light in colour, almost white, or perhaps more accurately, like straw-coloured water. "Is it a new sort of neck oil you've got?" I said. "New flavour." "What's it made of?" "Taters." "And you've got 2 bottles today," I said. "Must try and get used to the new flavour." "And do you think," I said, "we shall catch a bigger fish now that you've got a new kind of neck oil?" "Shouldn't be a bit surprised, boy," he said, "if we didn't get one as big as a donkey." That afternoon it was very hot and still as we sat under the shade of a big willow by the side of a pool that seemed to have across it an oiled black skin, broken only by the minutest winks of sunlight when the leaves of the willow parted softly in gentle turns of air. "Aye, this is the place where me and Sammy tickle that big un out," my Uncle Silas said. I said how much I too should like to catch one I could take home in a pig trough, and my Uncle Silas said, "Well, you never will if you keep whittling and torting and a-ompolodgin about." My Uncle Silas was the only man in the world who ever used the word a-ompolodgin. It was a very expressive word, and when my Uncle Silas accused me of a-ompolodgin, it was a very serious matter. It meant that you had buttons on your bottom, and if you didn't drop it, he would damn well ding your ear. "You gotter sit still and wait, and not keep fidgeting. And very light in another half hour you'll see a big un lying aside of that log. But not if you keep a-ompolodgin, see?" "Yes, Uncle." "That's why I bring the neck oil," he said. "It quiets you down so you ain't a-whittling and an a-ompolodgin all the time." Can I have a drop of neck oil?" "When you get thirsty," my Uncle Silas said, "there's that spring in the next meadow." After this, my Uncle Silas took a good steady drink of the neck oil and settled down with his back against a tree. I put a lump of paste on my hook and dropped it into the pool. The only fish I could see in the pool were shoals of little silver tiddlers that flickered about, a huge fallen willow log a yard or 2 upstream, or came to play inquisitively about my little white and scarlet float, making it quiver up and down like the trembling scraps of sunlight across the water. Sometimes the bread paste got too wet and slipped from the hook, and I quietly lifted the rod from the water and put another lump on the hook. I tried almost not to breathe as I did all this, and every time I took the rod out of the water, I glanced furtively at my Uncle Silas to see if he thought I was a-ompolodgin. Every time I looked at him, I could see that he evidently didn't think so. He was always far too busy with the neck oil. I suppose we must have sat there for nearly 2 hours on that hot, windless afternoon of July, I not speaking a word and trying not to breathe as I threw my little float across the water, my Uncle Silas never uttering a sound, except for a drowsy grunt or 2 as he uncorked 1 bottle of neck oil or felt to see if the other was safe in his jacket pocket. All that time there was no sign of a fish as big as a hippopotamus, or even one you could take home in a pig trough, and all the time my Uncle Silas kept tasting the flavour of the neck oil, until at last his head began to fall forward on his chest. Soon all my bread paste was gone, and I got so afraid of disturbing my Uncle Silas that I scotched my rod to the fallen log and walked into the next meadow to get myself a drink of water from the spring. The water was icy cold from the spring, and very sweet and good, and I wished I had bought myself a bottle too, so that I could fill it, and sit back against a tree, as my Uncle Silas did, and pretend that it was neck oil. 10 minutes later, when I got back to the pool, my Uncle Silas was fast asleep by the tree trunk, one bottle empty by his side, and the other still in his jacket pocket. There was, I thought, a remarkable expression on his face, a wonderful rosy fogginess about his mouth, and nose, and eyes. But what I saw in the pool as I went to pick my rod from the water was still a more wonderful thing. During the afternoon the sun had moved some way round, and under the branches of the willow, so that now at the first touch of evening there were clear bands of pure yellow light across the pool. In one of these bands of light, by the fallen log, lay a long lean fish, motionless as a bar of steel, just under the water, basking in the evening sun. When I woke my Uncle Silas, he came to himself with a fumbling start, red eyes only half open, and I thought for a moment that perhaps he would ding my ear for a-ompolodgin. "But it's as big as a hippopotamus," I said. "It's as big as the one in the pig trough." "Where, boy, where?" When I pointed out the fish, my Uncle Silas could not at first see it lying there by the log, but after another nip of neck oil, he started to focus it correctly. "By jingo, that's a big un," he said. "By jingo, that's a walloper." "What sort is it?" "Pike," he said. "Give me your big lump of paste, and I'll dangle it on top of his nose." "The paste is all gone." "Then give us a bit of caraway, and we'll tiddle him up with that." "I've eaten all the caraway," I said. "Besides, you said you and Sammy Twizzle used to catch them with your hands. You said you used to tickle their bellies." "Well, that were—" "Get him, get him, get him," I said. "He's as big as a donkey." Slowly, and with what I thought was some reluctance, my Uncle Silas heaved himself to his feet. He lifted the bottle from his pocket and took a sip of neck oil. Then he slapped the cork back with the palm of his hands, wiped his lips with the back of his hand, and put the bottle back in his pocket. "No, you stand back," he said, "and damn it, don't get a-ompolodgin." I stood back. My Uncle Silas started to creep along the fallen willow log on his hands and knees. Below him, in the band of sunlight, I could see the long, dark, lean pike basking. For nearly 2 minutes my Uncle Silas hovered on the end of the log. Then slowly he balanced himself on one hand and dipped his other into the water. Over the pool it was marvellously, breathlessly still, and I knew suddenly that this was how it had been in the good great old days, when my Uncle Silas and Sammy Twizzle had caught the mythical mammoth ones 50 years before. "God almighty!" my Uncle Silas suddenly yelled. "I'm going over!" My Uncle Silas was indeed going over. Slowly, like a turning spit, the log started heeling, leaving my Uncle Silas half slipping, half dancing on its edge, like a man on a greasy pole. In terror I shut my eyes. When I opened them and looked again, my Uncle Silas was just coming up for air, yelling, "God almighty, boy, I believe you a-ompolodged." I thought for a moment he was going to be very angry with me. Instead he started to cackle with crafty, devilish, stentorian laughter, his wet lips dribbling, his eyes more fiery than ever under the dripping water. his right hand triumphant as he snatched it from the stream.
"I just managed to catch it, boy,"
he yelled, and in triumph he held up the bottle of neck oil. And somewhere downstream, startled by his shout, a whole host of little tiddlers jumped from the water, dancing in the evening sun.